looking at the mythology, experience, and psyche of the Asian American male. Alex, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, is a former Seattle bureau chief for the Los Angeles Times and longtime staff writer for the Seattle Times. He currently teaches at the University of Oregon. Big Little Man was the winner of the prestigious Work in Progress Prize from the J. Anthony Lewis Prize Project. Please help me welcome Alex Tizon.
Let me just take a second to observe the faces that I'm seeing here, because I'm a little bit taken aback by just the faces from different parts of my life coming together here and hearing one of my favorite faces in the whole world, which is Alex Brooks. I've never been much of a celebrator. I didn't celebrate my 30th birthday because who cares, right? I didn't celebrate my 40th birthday because it wasn't important. I didn't celebrate my 50th birthday because who has the time? My 50th birthday, who has the time, right? But this I'm going to celebrate. This I'm going to celebrate. Thank you guys for being here to celebrate with me. I'm just looking at the faces that I haven't seen in so long. Leslie, Becky, Mike, Julie, and Vince. I haven't seen my friends, Alan Donaldson, who I went to high school with. Here's Dennis Selzer and I went to high school in Umatilla, Oregon, several decades ago. Haven't seen him in many, many years. I've got all 6 of my sisters here. They're either here or they're on their way. And I like to say that I have 6 sisters named Maria, because I do. I have 6 sisters named Maria, and I'm hoping that you'll meet them later. Just be careful when you say Maria in a crowded room. Half the room is going to turn their heads. Maria. You'll see later that my sisters are all, I write about them in the book, and you'll see that they're all beautiful and smart, and any man who enters our family also knows that they're dangerous. Right? Am I right?
For sure.
Tabby? You don't want to mess with the 6 Marias. Right, Jen?
Right.
But anyway, you're all here. And let me just, I'm just gonna tell a single story today. And I forgot the students that came here from U of O, Adam and Moral, Lucy and Jay, and I think there are a few that are on their way. A lot of people are still on their way because they're really here for the party. The party that's to follow. Just going to tell one story, okay? That's it. And it really, all it is it's what I talk about in the first chapter of the book, which is it's about a trip that I took to the Philippines. When I was in my 20s, I flew to this little island, Cebu, to watch a fight. I went there to watch a fight. This room is full of fight fans, rabid fight fans, right? And I know that those of you who know me, you know that I'm one too. The trip I took to the Philippines was the first one that I had taken as a young man, as an adult, excuse me. It was the first one I had taken as an adult. And it was a strange world. It was a strange world with different rules, different ways of behaving, different ways of conducting yourself. And I didn't know any of them. All of it was new to me. So, I mean, the very first day that I arrived there, a little old lady, about this tall, came up to me and said, "You are so fat." Actually, what she said was, "You have a fat face," is what she said. She didn't quite say it like that. She said, "You have a very bad face," is the way she put it. A bad face. Yeah. I said, "Thank you." And I was thinking, who is this lady? And why did she just insult me? But it actually happened a few times on that trip. People saying that I was fat. Me, fat. And I come to learn that being fat is good. In the Philippines, particularly in the rural areas of the Philippines, fat is good. Fat means that you eat well. Fat means that you can afford to eat well. Fat is a sign of privilege. So if you ever travel to the Philippines and people tell you you're fat, they're paying you a high compliment. And actually, I had this written down. Yeah, let's do it. Why not? Just in honor of my culture, I'd like to take this moment. Maybe I'm going to ask each of you to turn to the person next to you, left or right. Look at them lovingly in the eyes. I'm waiting. And just say, "You are fat."
You are fat.
Doesn't that feel good? Yeah. Everything about the Philippines was different. The way people moved their bodies was different. Hand gestures were different. So when I landed at the airport, I caught somebody in the corner of my eye. There was a guy standing in the street, standing next to his car, and he was doing this. He was doing this to me. And I was thinking, you waving at me? You're waving at me? I thought, wow, what a friendly guy. What a friendly nation. So I waved back. And he did it some more, and I did it some more, and then he got more aggressive about it. It's like doing this, and I was going. And then he did this, and then he gestured toward his car. And it turns out, of course, that this, in the Philippines, doesn't mean goodbye, like we think of it as goodbye. It means come here. This. Somebody does this to you in the Philippines, they're saying, come here. Come here. And it turns out that this guy was a taxi driver, and he wanted me to take his cab. And his name was Bobby, and Bobby's the star of Chapter 1, because he became my guide on this, my few days in Cebu. Bobby was, I don't know, he had a cigarette glued to his lips. He had kind of long, greasy hair, kept a gun in his glove compartment. He had seriously bloodshot eyes, like he hadn't slept in a year. I mean, it was almost like someone took a red crayon and just scribbled in the whites of his eyes. But Bobby became my only friend in Cebu during these few days. And we made an arrangement, and he drove me around, he showed me around. Next morning, he picked me up and he drove me through the city, and he drove which is insanely crowded. Crowded in a way that most people who've never left America can't really relate to. Crowded. And we drove for about an hour, and he took me to this beach that was a little bit remote, kind of isolated. Pulled off to the side and parked his car. And then he took out a cigarette and he did this. And that, of course, is the Filipino way of pointing, in case you don't know that. And why would you know that, right? Those of you who are not from the Philippines. But basically, when they do this, which is what he was doing to me, he's doing this. And what he was doing was he was pointing at the beach that I had come to see. This was the beach that was the site of this fight. All right, so let's talk about the fight. It's really not accurate for me to say that I went to see this fight. I really went there to visualize it. I went there to imagine it, because the fight that I had come to see had taken place about 500 years earlier. So I want you to imagine it with me, if you can. On one side, there was this army led by a guy named Ferdinand Magellan. Ferdinand Magellan was European. He sailed for Spain. He wanted to be the first European to circumnavigate the globe, sail all the way around the globe. And he almost made it. He made it about 2/3 of the way. They left Spain and crossed the Atlantic, rounded the tip of South America, crossed the Pacific, and everywhere they went, of course, Magellan and his men, they subdued the people that they met. They claimed their land for Spain, preached the gospel, of course, and then left. That's what they did. They came and conquered and left until they reached this island, until they reached this one particular island. But when they reached it, they realized that this little island had a very wide shelf, so that they had to anchor their boats about a half mile from shore. And they had to wade about a half mile through about waist-deep water to get to the shore. It was a long, hard slog, okay? On the other side of this battle were the people who actually lived on this island. They were the inhabitants of this place. The leader of this island was a guy named Lapu-Lapu. He was a black-haired, golden brown skinned man with tattoos covering his entire body. And he led an army of about 1,500 warriors. And if you can, try to imagine what Lapu-Lapu and his men were thinking as Magellan approached. Lapu-Lapu and his warriors had never seen white people before. They didn't know what this was. The hair growing from their faces, right? They didn't know what this second skin that these invaders or these warriors were wearing. They seemed to have this shiny layer of skin, and it turns out that Magellan and his men were armored. And so these men, these natives on the beach, were looking at Magellan, and they were wondering what was coming towards them. What was this? Were these gods? Who were these beings that were heading toward us? Now, Lapu-Lapu and his men knew that they were coming. And you know why they knew? Because Magellan had sent the scout earlier in the day, and he burned down one of Lapu-Lapu's villages, just as a sign of things to come. If you don't heed us, this is what's going to happen to you. And Lapu-Lapu didn't heed. Lapu-Lapu basically sent an emissary back and said, come on, you're not going to subdue this island. Well, you know, most of you know how the story ends, right? There's no suspense. There's no suspense there. Well, maybe some of you don't. Maybe some of you don't know how it ends. But here's what happened. Magellan miscalculated. He thought that the battle would begin on the beach, when his men reached the beach. Because then his armor would actually be helpful to them, right? It would be an advantage to have armor on the beach because they were used to fighting with armor on land. But Lapu-Lapu decided they were going to invade Magellan and his men. They were going to attack them while they were still in the water, which was a major strategic move. And so that's what happened. The fight was fought in waist-deep water. And what happened was that the armor that was an advantage for Europeans on the ground became a disadvantage in the water. Because why? They were like lurch. Lurch? Does anybody know lurch? Generation gap. They were like big lurches. They were moving in slow motion, and the natives who were defending the island wore hardly anything at all. They knew the waters well, and they knew how to move swiftly. So imagine, if you will, for those of us who are fans, imagine 1,500 Manny Pacquiaos. 1,500 Manny Pacquiaos, right? With spears, with swords. And so, those of you who know the history know what happened. Magellan and his men had no chance. They were sliced and diced, and within a span of about an hour, Magellan had been cut up into little pieces, and as well as a few of his other men, and the survivors fled on their boats and they left. So Lapu-Lapu was able to repel this invasion. Why did I want to see that? Well, you probably already guessed, right? I was intrigued by the image of white warriors invading brown warriors. And I was particularly intrigued by the fact that in this one case, 500 years ago, in this one case, the golden brown man, the golden brown men of that island, the people who look like me, won. I had to go back 500 years to find an example of that. Gosh, okay. So anyway, that's the history lesson. History lesson, right? How many of you actually knew this story? I'm just curious. Just a handful of them. It's actually, it's a cool story. Somebody's going to make a movie out of it. Yeah. Somebody's got to make a movie because it's a natural story. And I can't wait for that movie to come out. I want to see it. I want to see how this transpired. Well, why was this important to me? Why was it important that I go to this place and to stand on the beach and feel the sand and to see how this battle played out? It was because I grew up in America in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And I grew up with the idea that golden brown men who look like me, men of Asia, didn't win in contests against white men and black men. It was just an assumption. I don't think I ever challenged it. It was just something that I think, I inherited. And it wasn't agony for me. It wasn't agony for me to carry that around. It didn't feel good. But I didn't really know what I didn't really know how to articulate it, except that that assumption was buried pretty deep. Everything I learned growing up in America, everything I learned just corroborated that notion, that idea. Everything I learned in school, everything I saw on the news. We grew up in the 60s, the Vietnam War was going on. The face of the enemy looked a lot like mine when I turned on the news. I don't know how many of you remember the My Lai massacre, or all those Vietnamese faces that were frozen in death. And I would look at those faces, and I would see my own relatives. I'd see my aunts and sisters and brothers. My Lai massacre. The enemy, face of the enemy. Everything I saw on television. Television was a big teacher. Television and movies, actually. I don't have to tell you, right? Most people are familiar with how Asians, particularly in the 60s, 70s, 80s, changing now, but how Asians are depicted, particularly Asian men, in the media. I mean, I was just reading an article the other day about how there's a new kind of stock character in Hollywood. It's the expendable Asian crew member. If you watch any kind of disaster movie or any kind of movie that involves a lot of mayhem and death, and you see an Asian man, an Asian male character at the beginning of it, that's the guy who's going to get stomped by Godzilla. Am I right here? No? Maybe I'm exaggerating. I don't think so. I think that the images that I saw growing up were images that were deeply embedded in me, and I think that's why we can't, as people who work in the media, there are lots of journalists in this room, a handful of journalists in this room, we can't really underplay that. We can't underplay how powerful the messages are that are embedded in movies, television shows, and news programs. So, I grew up with this idea. Asian boys, Asian men, were lesser men. So part of the reason for why I took this trip to Cebu, and I didn't really understand it at the time that I took it, was that I was looking for evidence of my own worth. I was trying to build a case for myself. I wanted to know that I had worth as a man. Now, a lot of you who knew me when I was younger, I guess some of you might be surprised because, and it doesn't surprise me that you'd be surprised because this stuff was deeply private. I wouldn't share this with anybody. It was a deep shame. And so, like a lot of people who experience deep shame, I hid mine under a very, maybe somewhat confident front. A confident front that became more real as I got older. But at the time, I was faking it. Journalism school, we always say, you fake it until you make it. I faked it a lot when I was a young guy. But anyway, that's what this book is about. So this battle I just described to you, it actually makes up the first chapter of the book. But if you want to find out what happens to And the rest of the story, you have to. But I have been on this personal investigation of manhood, on and off, really, on and off, more off than on, for a few decades. And let me share with you, I want to share with you four conclusions that I've come to. Obviously, not gospel, just things that I've come to personally. The first, the history that you're taught is always a partial history. The story that we think we know about nations, about empires, about people, about how we got to where we've got, is always a partial history. And if you want to know the whole story, most of the time you have to dig it out yourself. That includes today. I mean, that's today too. And there's more information today available to us than at any other time in history. And we can dig out information that isn't available to us. I'll give you an example. I didn't know. Everyone knows. I mean, I grew up with the John. I knew the John. I'd never heard about the Walking. Why was that? Why hadn't I heard that side of the equation? I grew up, of course I knew Christopher Columbus's story, but I'd never heard of the story of the great Chinese admiral named Zheng He. I bet most of you haven't either. Zheng He lived about 60 years before Columbus. He had a greater fleet, I mean a massive, technologically advanced fleet. He traveled farther than Columbus. He influenced more kingdoms and people and countries than Columbus did. He was, by every measure, a great explorer. Why didn't I learn about him? Well, I'm not going to tell you why, because I'm not exactly sure. I have theories, but if that question intrigues you, why is it that we learn certain things and not others? It's a worthwhile question to spend time on and to try to answer. So, number one, the history that we learn, the history that we think we know, is almost always a partial story, and very often just a sliver. Number two, race is only one lens. So this is the weird paradox of this book. I spend the whole book talking about my Asianness, and you're really looking at race and manhood and looking at the whole world and my entire life through this lens of race. And at the end of this decades-long kind of investigation, I've really come to see that the lens of race is actually much less useful than I thought it was. That there are other, more accurate ways to look at life than through the lens of race. So I spent 3/4 of the book talking about race, and I came to the conclusion that, you know what, there's other things to focus on. Other things besides this very obsolete, by the way, very obsolete notion of race. Because race, the term, what does it imply? It implies that we are made up of these separate, disparate categories and groups. But really, when you look around and when you travel the world, you'll see, anyone will see, really we're a continuum. We aren't as separated as we'd like to think. There's a continuum from this to that. And all of us are all on this continuum. It's a different way of looking at it. We're not separate. So that's point 2. race is only one lens. And in my own life, race has become less important and less of a determining factor when I meet people. There are other more compassionate ways to look at life and at other people. And that's something we can talk about maybe later after a little whiskey. Because I think it would be more fun. Whiskey, don't you? Yeah. Number 3. Shame thrives in secrecy. I thought that my problem had to do with race growing up. I thought the problem was with my own race, the fact that I was a particular kind of race. And the older I got, the more I realized that the issue really wasn't, it had to do with race, but it had more to do with shame itself. Shame. And how does shame is the sense of being flawed or being deficient in a way that makes you unlovable. And shame has a way of residing in all of us at some point, right, in our lives. And shame can take any shape, it can take any form. Mine took the form, it took the shape of race, it became a racial thing, when really the issue for me was the shame itself. I had to confront the shame. And how did I come to this? It didn't come in a flash, it came over time. And it came after reflecting on all these relationships that I've had over the years. I have a friend, Mike Kazmark. Remember Mike? Mm-hmm. Mike Kazmark, blue eyes, blonde hair, 6'9". He had an inferiority complex. He was ashamed of his height, believe it or not. He wanted to be a pilot. He grew too tall. You can't be 6'9" and be a pilot for some reason. He was a bachelor for the longest time. I don't know why. He thought it was because he was too tall. He used to lie. He used to lie about his height to people. He was 6'9". He used to tell people he was 6'8". And I rolled my eyes. And he used to make himself small in conversations. It's funny. I can laugh about it. It wasn't funny to him. He was single up until the time he was in his 30s. Still a good friend. But I was just amazed. Man, came from a good family. Blue eyes, blonde hair. I thought he was good looking. He talked a little too much. That was the real reason he was talked too much. Didn't really know how to listen. Now, that'll do it right there. But he was ashamed of this thing that I looked at. And that's how shame, isn't that weird? That's how shame is, that the thing that we're ashamed of, very, very, very often, people don't see it that way at all. They see something else that's wrong with you, or right with you. But they don't see the thing you're ashamed of. Mike was that way. I had a friend named Ken Parrish. Ken Parrish, Alan, you remember Ken Parrish?
I do.
Ken Parrish was maybe one of the smartest people I've ever met. And in this little town that Alan and I grew up in, population 750, Eastern Oregon at the time, Ken was really too smart. And he was ashamed of it. He was ashamed of being too smart. And he did his best to dumb himself down. Wow. What an awful thing. What an awful thing. And we all know people who, we all carry shame for all sorts of reasons. We're not thin enough, we're not tall enough, we're too short, we don't have enough money, we come from the wrong family, we come from the wrong ethnicity, we come from the wrong part of town, we don't have enough diplomas on our walls, right? Our paychecks aren't big enough. Whatever. We all have that thing. We all have that thing at some point in our lives. And that's what I had. And I something that really I just stumbled on this the other day. I'd like to just share it with you. It's by a writer named Brene Brown. Very short. Shame derives its power from being unspeakable. That's why it loves perfectionists. It's so easy to keep us quiet. If we cultivate enough awareness about shame, to name it and speak it, we've cut it off at the knees. Shame hates having words wrapped around it. If we speak shame, it begins to wither. That says it better than I can say. If we speak shame, it begins to wither. Fourth and last point. The antidote to loneliness or outsiderdom, as one of my friends calls it, outsiderdom or insecurity. The antidote to loneliness or outsiderdom or insecurity is not in becoming perfect, because we all know, those of us who've lived long enough, futile, right? That's a never-ending quest. It never ends. The antidote to loneliness or outsiderdom or insecurity, it's tuning into your purpose. So the temptation when we are an outsider, when we have that gnawing insecurity, the temptation is to turn even more inward and to try to figure out what's wrong with us, right? What's wrong with us? That we need to figure that out. We need to fix it. We think we can do it up here. But the antidote, the secret actually, is to turn the opposite direction. The secret is to turn away from that obsession with the self and turning it outward towards something that's bigger than you, and to serve it. What am I talking about? Very abstract. Well, for me, I stumbled on my purpose very, very accidentally, actually. I like to tell people that I found my vocation like someone who gets drunk and wakes up with a tattoo on their wherever. I just woke up one day and I was, working for a newspaper. And the way I got there it was not a straight path, let me put it that way. It was a lot of different reasons why I went there, and they weren't noble reasons, all of them. And it wasn't like I knew exactly what I wanted. But you know what? What happened after this, in this process of pursuing that thing that I cared about, which was really telling stories. And it was telling stories of other people. What happened was that I found myself in this profession, this role, whatever you want to call it, that I woke up one day and I had a reason to wake up. And I had a reason to not dwell so much on my own deficiency. I ended up spending, 20-something years telling stories of other people who were, in their own ways, on the outside edge of the mainstream of life. Outsiders. If you really read the stories that I've written over the years, they have to do with outsiders, outcasts. And what I found at the end of this was that by giving these people voice and by making them seen, I became more visible, I became more solid. And it was an indirect result. It was an indirect result. It was an indirect result of pursuing the thing that I loved. And that had more to do with making me a more solid person with a more solid identity. It had nothing to do with figuring out my own shame. So that's That's what I'm getting at. The antidote to outsiderdom, to insecurity, isn't to become perfect, right? It's to tune in to your purpose. Tune into it. That's not going to happen overnight. And it says here that I'm done with my talk. But let's talk. You guys want to? You guys want to ask? Do you have any questions you want to ask? There's got to be and you know what? I actually brought some index cards. And you know, seeing my former students here, I'm tempted to give you a quiz. Because sometimes it's hard to ask a question in a group of people you don't know. So, hey Dill, can you come up? Oh yeah, Julie.
I actually have a question. I was at an OMSI